The Two World Podcast, in conjunction with K-Bear 57 AM in Sicily, Alaska, a fictional subsidiary of the Minifield Communications Network, presents this episode of the Two World Podcast. Chris in the morning, who normally sits in the chair at K-Bear AM, is off visiting friends and relatives in West Virginia, those that aren't presently incarcerated. Manning the dial for the Two World Podcast this morning are Ken and our two co-hosts, Jacob and Barney. Morning, guys.
Good morning, Ken. Thank you for that awesome intro.
Love it.
Yes, and for our audience, as you may know, every so many episodes, we love to jump back in with the three of us exploring Northern exposure. And we have a very interesting episode to discuss with you today. Is it called Things Get Extinct or Go Extinct? I'm trying to remember. Become. Things become extinct. And very interesting episode about mortality and also about community support, grounding, and resilience. And so it'll be interesting for us, I think, to delve into that with, of course, a healthy dose of humor mixed in, because this episode has plenty of that as well. So, Barney, you had initially posed a few questions to us when we were thinking about this episode. Would you like to start there, or did you want to start with some more general introductory information for that?
Yeah, you've set me for a bit of a challenge. I think when I was thinking of the questions, I may have been still just at the tail end of jet lag. So I'm not sure how well I remember my questions.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will pull them up. I think one of them, it was a time where in your life when you felt isolated, something like that.
Culturally.
Because a part of the episode delves into Dr. Fleischman's search for other Jewish members in the broader community, and he can't find any. So I think your question was about that, and then the other one was about. I think I found them. The first one: have you been in a situation similar to Joel's, being isolated from one element of your home culture? So maybe that is a good one to start with. And would one of you be willing to just give a quick summary of what is going on for Joel in this regard in this episode?
Yeah, he I forget how he gets to thinking about it, but he wants to connect with he's I guess is he looking at the census, or he's looking at the phone book, or he's trying to see how many, what kind of Jewish population there is in the area. And he finds himself really surprised how few there are. And I think he said that like the borough of Arrowhead County is like the size of, what did he say, like Rhode Island or something. And he thinks that he's the only Jewish person in the whole area. And he keeps kind of not deluding himself, but he keeps up hope as he's talking to Ed and saying, oh, well, let's check, Talkeetna or whatever it was, some town. He's like, that's a pretty big town. They've got a few stoplights or something. And he checks the phone book and there's like 2 or 3. And then he's like, well, how about Fairbanks? And there's only like a few thousand, a few hundred maybe or less. And we sense when it dawns on him that he really is isolated and really is alone here in Alaska in terms of Jewish culture and Jewish religion.
Yeah, and then it segues into he's in the office with Marilyn, his receptionist, office person, and he's having the conversation with her, and he continues to look through the phone book, and in the conversation with Marilyn, he says, Marilyn, a lot of times when the last name ends in N-E-R, this will be indicative of a Jewish person, and Marilyn, who has said nothing basically the whole time, and this is her character and how they portray her, says, what about Kevin Costner? And, then it's time to cut away to Ira and the flutes and all that. it's great with Marilyn because they portray her such that she may be totally in control of her commentary at that point, or she's just saying, "What about Kevin Costner?" And we're left to try to get inside Marilyn's head, and it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it seems like for Joel, at first he's incredulous and he's assuming that there will be more Jewish residents in Alaska, and then he's flipping through phone books and he's looking for these common names, Jewish last names, and not finding them. And and I think that gets to Barney's question about have we gone into a situation assuming that we would feel more connected and we ended up not being more connected, or we intentionally were going into a situation knowing that for a while we would be isolated, or what was that like? And I think it would be kind of interesting to trade some stories about that. I think anytime a person can go abroad, in a lot of ways they're kind of stepping into that dynamic for a period of time, particularly if they go to a country that speaks a different language, because already then you're in a position of having to navigate life without the convenience of just, this familiar language I have, I can just fall back on. And but then also socially, I have a few examples. I remember one time in college, I took a Hebrew course. It was a tutorial, and we had a guest speaker come to campus for another event unrelated to this class. He was a rabbi, and then he came to our class and was meeting us and wanting to encourage us, in our studies. And then he asked the question, who in here is Jewish? And everybody, all the other students other than me, raised their hands. And he was like, very good, very good. And then he kind of, I don't know if he intended it this way or not, but then there was just this silence, and there was a beat, and then he went on, and I just kind of felt like a little bit displaced in that group. Like I was not in the, the majority of that particular moment. It's just a small little example, but I remember feeling, like that doesn't happen to me very often. I guess it should make me reflect. Why is that? I guess, well, in a lot of the context where I am, I'm not typically in the minority, but being displaced, even in a small way like that, can give you perspective and help you realize, other people who probably aren't with having my background probably feel that way all the time, or quite often. One other quick story. When my kids were younger, our first two, Mike and Aubrey, I was really into church architecture for this one season in life. And so I drive around looking at different churches, and I was particularly fascinated by Eastern Christian churches, the Eastern Orthodox and things like that, because of the architecture being so unique and different with on the interior with icons and the different ways that they painted and presented the space. So I take my kids to these places and one time we went to a Greek Orthodox church not far from where we live here. And it just so happened that they had a meal that evening. And we were looking around the church, and somebody from the congregation came up and they said, what's your name? And I told them, and he said, well, you're welcome to come to our meal. And he took, and I said, oh, no, that's okay. And he said, no, really, it would be nice. And so I went into their area where people were eating, and he sat me down at a table with just me and my two kids. And then he left. And there was nobody for me to talk to, and everybody was staring at me. It was like one of those like moments where the record goes, and it's quiet. And then finally, like I'm like, okay. And I was talking with my kids a little bit, but then one of the people at an adjacent table said, why are you here? And it wasn't in a friendly way. Like, why are you here? It was like, why are you here? Oh. And I said, well, so-and-so invited us to the meal, and they just kind of stared and didn't say anything. And so, once again, it's a small little example of feeling displaced, but it made me realize, like, since I'm connected with a community, a church, that for a visitor to walk in, that's a hard thing to do. First off, to just walk into a space you don't know, but for a visitor to come to a meal or whatever, I need to be extra careful to welcome them and not leave them alone, or just assume that they'll feel comfortable, but try to help them find a place and make sure they're connected and supported wherever they are, and to not feel like displaced, that they don't belong there, that they don't have a place at the table, so to speak. So yeah. What about you guys though? I've been taking a long time here. Do you have any stories like that you'd like to share?
Well, Jacob, what you've really led me to in my mind is our friend Ram from Nepal, who came to our Easter morning service, I think, at Worcester Mennonite, and has been, voluntarily, he put himself in that position of um, being the person from another culture and denomination, religion, etc. And he stays for our meal. And I remember exactly as you're describing, really wanting to reach out to Ram. And I remember, you conversing with him as well to really make him feel okay about being here, and really make him feel a part of what is going on, and affirm his courage and initiative for taking a look at what's going on in our little part of the world. Yeah. Now, the other story that I had in my mind before we started, it's just small. As an undergraduate at Miami of Ohio, I came from basically an Italian background on my mom's side, and those are the relatives we associated with. And for whatever reason, there were a number of times in a group mainly of the guys in our dorm where it would be like, well, let's see what the Italian says, or let's see what the Italian thinks. And suddenly I'm the Italian. And it was all in fun and in jest. But now as you look back, you start to maybe overanalyze and say, I wonder how that really came to be and what they were really saying. So it's a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, if I can just pick up, even kind of going back to what Jacob was saying, one thought that I occurred to me from your story is, yeah, I mean, I think that of course we would know, or you knew, or even like with Cancer with Ram, that the person knows going into such a situation that especially Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox or whatnot is fairly different from maybe someone's background. And so you're going in knowing that things are going to be different, but food is such a central, like, key basic thing to every culture that it should be something that connects us. And then when that sense of hospitality or sense of sharing and food together is taken from you, it's like it's like, the floor has been vanished underneath your feet and you're really left. And it, like you say, it's a good kind of lesson for us that it could really leave someone, floundering, really, really feeling. I mean, if you can't find a connection through food, how could you find a connection? There's nothing left, that's more basic than food. And so, I guess that's really something to think about and be really, maybe we can take it for granted, but have it be as a little, like a warning for us, maybe, or just something to keep the forefront of our thoughts. When I wrote the question, the first thing that came to my mind was my time in Thailand, and maybe I can juxtapose it a bit with where I am now. The host family I stayed with, both of them, the mom and the dad, were both pastors, and so it was natural for me to go to their church. And the Thai language for me at the time, it wasn't too hard for me to get a hang of, but I had trouble really connecting, even though maybe a lot of some of the hymns were familiar, and probably kind of similar to now, where a lot of them maybe I just wasn't familiar with hearing at the Mennonite church, and they were probably more familiar to a different church, and then just translated into Thai. And I had trouble connecting with the church community that way, and then I found like I think the International Church in the middle of Chiang Mai, and I went to that because it would be in English, and I went to it with probably thinking that it would be more familiar to what I was used to growing up, especially since it would be in English and a bunch of other Christians there. And I guess I was thinking, oh, it's going to be nice, kind of Mennonitish, Anabaptist, and sing hymns and things like that. And it wasn't that. It was more, this being at my time, like kind of really being away from my community for the first time. It was more, a lot of praise songs and a lot of repetition of the chorus and things like that, and things that now I can appreciate, but I had trouble appreciating then. And so that likewise didn't sit so well with me, and I really felt stuck for a while. And one of the other volunteers through MCC, he had been overseas volunteering and doing I think MCC has a thing where you can not necessarily volunteer, but like kind of work with a family in Germany or in Europe, and he'd done that. And he said sometimes you can't pick and choose your context. Sometimes you have to accept and find the value in what you have around you. If you choose going to a Thai church, then find the value in that. Or if you choose going to this international church, find your value in that, because you can still find, your own kind of personal, private relationship with God in those settings too. And that really helped me to take a step back and realize maybe I was blocking myself from being worshipful in that way. And another thought that came to me related to this question was kind of thinking of what Ken was saying. When I was at Marquette for my first year, that was so very different for me too. Even though I went to a secular high school, in this case, I'm going to a Catholic school, and it was fun to see a lot of the things that were similar, like especially when it was the season of Lent, and I realized, oh wow, these kids kind of look at Lent really the same way that I did, giving up certain things instead of just fasting, and that was fun. But there were a lot of things that were different. And then when I transferred to Goshen, then it was kind of like, being wrapped in a warm blanket, being back in my community again. But I was surprised to see that like 40% or so of the student population wasn't Mennonite. And then I could kind of maybe understand how they were feeling, but also see that there was a real openness around campus too, that there was no sense of like groups being formed or anything like that. And it was, kind of a nice oasis for me of having everyone together in a community, even though people were from separate, different backgrounds, that we found a way to have this community together on campus.
Barney, was there in the 40%, was there a predominant group or?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I wonder too. I think maybe just kind of a general Christian group, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there. I think part of what you were saying initially was when we feel isolated or displaced, there can be a dimension of that is self-imposed, or that is in our own head, or tied in with our own thinking or attitude. But then you also conclude there with an example of being displaced and then returning to a comfortable environment and seeing how, the externals do impact us. But hopefully the environment where we are has a culture, like it sounds like Goshen was this way, that it was hospitable to people from different backgrounds. So it can make you feel like, well, even though this is comfortable to me, maybe people who don't have the same background can still find a place where they belong and are supported. That always is important. I'm wondering if we could move a little bit to the second question that you posed to us. have you ever been in a situation like Hollings getting redeemed or rescued by somebody younger than you? Or have you ever been the younger one doing the rescuing? And just to say, maybe for Dr. Fleischman, being displaced was um, trying to find somebody else that he identified with. But for Hollings, being displaced involved the loss of a family member and his sense of his mortality. And that's a different type of being displaced. It has its own type of grief. So, yeah, I wanted to see if we could move to that. Um, have we had any experiences with being displaced in that way? Can we relate to Holling? Can we relate to Holling's girlfriend? What's her name again? I'm trying to remember.
Shelley.
Shelley, right. And how she was trying to help him. And I guess the parallel also with Ed and what he's trying to do, we could draw in. Do we need to give our listeners some more context to know a little bit about Holling's situation and about Ed's situation? Or
Well, I think, the humorous part with Holling is he's basically having a midlife crisis at age 63. And then Charlie, it's Charlie, right? Passed away. And at 110, it's time for Holling to really reassess his life. And then off he goes.
yes. And for I'm trying to think of a way to we could also explain a parallel track that's also tracking with this theme of I don't know if you would call it mortality. I guess the episode talks about it in terms of things being extinct. But Ed's own story about wanting to shoot a film about something truly unique, somebody doing something that is really one of a kind, that actually maybe they're the last of their kind or something, and doing that. And so he finds somebody who makes beautiful wooden flutes, and it seems like they fit this profile perfectly. They're the last from their tribe that knows how to do this, and that they don't have a successor appointed to carry it on. And so either of those stories kind of deals with maybe the sense of extinction or mourning, and Ed kind of working through that, like, and asking this craftsman who makes the flutes, like, does it bother you that when you die, this art will be lost? I thought that was a very powerful question and a very powerful scene. And I was so surprised by the answer. He's like, no, it's kind of the lay of the land. There used to be dinosaurs and the buffalo and other things that were a part of this world. And then in time, they became extinct. And so too will it be with me. And I just love that Ed doesn't leave it there. He's like, maybe I've been approaching this whole question the wrong way. Instead of making this film, maybe I need to step in and learn this art of making the flutes. And so then he steps in to become like an apprentice and carry it on. So interesting to me. So do you have did either of those storylines connect with either of your experiences?
Well, just to kind of reflect on what you said a bit, until just now, I had seen them kind of as two separate, stories within the same episode. But now I can see the connection, especially thinking of, the person making the flutes, and kind of a sense of him being okay with his mortality, or with the mortality of these duck flutes. And then on the opposite, we have Holling, who is in shock with the idea that he might one day pass away. And what has he done with his life? What else? What is the meaning of life is what he ends up trying to see. And but kind of seeing those as like two ends of the really great question of life is really something that's really interesting, the way you post it. And I hadn't noticed that about the episode before.
And neither had I. It's a wonderful parallel, Barney.
There's a really wise teacher who became now a principal at the school where my youngest is going for elementary school at Central, named Shelley Bilderbeck. They call her Mrs. B. And she's taught them this phrase. And Hannah, our youngest, has repeated this over and over again at different life situations that are unpleasant, unexpected, or challenging. And the phrase is, "It's up to you." And the idea being, like, maybe connecting with Barney's comment earlier, sometimes the situations that we're put in when we're displaced or sad or have lost something important to us, our response, we don't have much control, but what we can control is our response, or how we try to look at it or approach it. And so I kind of wonder if we could just think for a minute about Holling and about Ed, or about I forget the name of the person who made the flutes. But
Ira.
Ira. Okay. How their mindset, I mean, Holling gets there eventually through the help of Shelley, but how their mindset makes a difference in the reality of the impermanent nature of life, of so many things, or in the face of death or loss. So I just wonder if that's mindset, if we could talk a little bit about the differences of their mindsets and how it comes to bear on what they're facing.
I thought it was interesting. At one point, Ed has had a number of little what am I going to do with my life? And here we're really introduced to producing film. And even as he is so into Ira Wingfeather's gift of making flutes, there was a time in one scene where, as Ed's filming, he just puts down the camera and is more into the moment of the making of the flute and the magic of that, which perhaps the film wasn't necessary at that point. And it reminds me of our present day obsession with phones and taking pictures and making videos, that sometimes it's always in my head to get the phone out to capture this moment. Well, there's a number of ways to capture moments, and the writers of this episode not only used Ed in that moment, they certainly used Shelley in the final scene, which I'm sure we'll discuss, or you'll discuss after I depart this morning, to get the point across.
Yeah, it makes me think of, Ed is really enjoying the moment, right? He's really absorbing everything about life at that time. And we see Holling on the other end. He's lamenting and saying, life has passed me by, it's passing me by. What have I done? And he's thinking about all of the moments that maybe he missed. He's being filled with regret and kind of losing his perspective. And we see Ed, on the other hand, just really taking it all in. And granted, it's in the midst of something, really unique, really one of a kind, really amazing that he's not seen before. But and exactly what Ken was saying, instead of capturing this moment, just setting that aside, his project, his main reason for being there aside, and just being in the moment. And yeah, exactly. Holling eventually gets there, but it really takes him a while to learn that lesson.
Mm-hmm. And Barney, when you pose that second question about, have you ever experienced someone younger redeeming you, how do you guys view the visits to Holling still? Chris talks of his lost year. Joel comes in as if he's only going to spend 3 minutes there, and obviously spends more time in conversation with him. How do you guys see that as part of this? The question of redemption.
I feel like Chris's visit with Holling directly inspires his segment on his radio show where he's reading from Dante, is it?
Yes.
And then he has this kind of reflection on life that, to me, was very profound, kind of admitting, yes, we all feel at times like we may despair the impermanence of the things around us, but at the end of the day, the journey is still beautiful. I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's still worth being invested and engaged in life. And he had a very long conversation with Holling, and they both were very candid and open about their struggles. And so it was like they connected in a deeper way, and it kind of contributed to his insights the following day on the radio. And I thought it was interesting for Joel how he actually felt kind of depressed after his time with Holling. But the thing was that he met Holling where Holling was, and he stayed. He could have left, but he stayed. And so we don't know to what extent Holling carries that with him. But I think sometimes in life, that's the best we can do is just be, even if we can't fix somebody's problem, just to sit with them and listen, even if it doesn't always feel like at the end we've accomplished a lot. How about you, Barney?
Yeah, I love that device of having people visit Holling at the still. I love how Chris keyed in on what was happening right away when he asked Shelley, where are the hash browns? And then just the light bulb goes off and he knows exactly where to find Holling. And, maybe they've been there together. Maybe they've had one of these things before. And I love how Chris meets him as an equal. They both have this. Chris is kind of Holling's guide in this way. Holling is going through the midlife crisis. Chris has had his midlife crisis because the men in his family have a history of what we find out later is just high blood pressure. And so pass away so early. And but there's a real camaraderie there between them. And I love that kind of connection that they have. And exactly like Chris really comes away kind of more in tune with his experience, seeing Holling's experience. And Joel, of course, went there hoping to help him as a physician, and then also helping to just help him out of the funk by saying, how many people would wish that they are in your shoes? And Holling instead brings Joel down with him and takes him down to his level and kind of, has him experience what Holling is going through at the moment. And then even, we could say that this was a Marilyn episode, Marilyn comes at the end and with just those few phrases, it's time. Time for what? Go home, and that's it. And that's what it was. I mean, Holling had definitely hit bottom by that point, and then he realized that he had hit bottom, and I think he realized where he was in his life, and at that moment, and what he was missing out. Again, I think it gave him that perspective to go back home. And then Shelley, of course, really gave him a beautiful, beautiful bit of perspective on his life then.
Yeah, I like what the word you use there, Barney, about perspective, because what Shelley does is I think she gives him a different narrative about what his life has meant. Like up to that point, he's comparing his story with his relatives who had gone before him and forged these paths that were so distinct and hard and rugged and memorable, and accomplished these great feats. But she kind of changes the story and frames it in terms of his relationship with her. And he may have other things on his bucket list that he wish he had done by that point. But she says, like, do you realize the story of these two people who met and fell in love, and the joy that they share together each day and being together? And actually, that was a very emotional part of the episode for me.
Yes.
I cried when I was watching that, because like how many of us want somebody like that in our life to remind us, like that I'm in it with you, that I love you, that we belong together, that your home is with me, and whatever comes your way, remember that we are connected. And so I think by her putting on that puppet show at the end where she tells that story, it gave him a completely different way to look at his life. And so it was transformative. And so I guess I kind of wonder how many times in life do we need somebody to help us reframe our story, to see it with fresh eyes, to look at whatever the loss is or how we've been displaced, to look at it differently and to recognize that we're not alone, that we're loved. So I thought that was very powerful.
Yeah, a truly redemptive moment. And Barney, when you posed that second question, it took me a very long time, for whatever reason, to think of someone younger than me impacted in any way close to what Shelley did for Holling in that last scene. Very difficult, um, I guess, in relation to the life I've lived. And I don't remember any midlife huge moments other than reflection on here's what I've done so far. And I could get busy on doing this, and this as I go forward. But I was reminded of one teaching colleague. Now, when I say younger, this is not younger by very much, but this was a guy, his first name, Jim, um, who could look at me and ask the important questions without worry of he's going to hurt my feelings or he's going to open a door that maybe shouldn't be opened. And I was deeply appreciative of that in the midst of the relationship in a marriage that I was experiencing. And Jim admittedly used to ask me in a professional setting, did I go too far? So there was a back and forth. Jim was very abrupt and courageous. He, in the midst of our teachers association, he was a guy that defended teachers at time who were basically defenseless in situations, but it was his job to step in. And I always looked at that as great courage because administratively they're looking at you and not pleased with you. But there were also times when he would say, "Did I go too far?" And I was flattered that he would ask me that in certain situations with other teachers, that we could just kind of review that in our heads and have that, because a lot of times our relationships as adults don't have the Holling and Chris moments and don't have a Marilyn who can really say in 2 sentences, Holling, it's time to go. And I appreciated that and still do appreciate that about this guy.
Yeah, it's interesting the importance of recognizing it's time to move on from something. It helps us to see it portrayed in a story or a show or a movie, so that when we go through our own crisis, even if there's not somebody there to say the words, that we know that that is part of the journey. There, we have to come to a point of however long it takes, but there will be a point at which it will be time for the next thing to move forward. And so hopefully this story from this episode will help us be attuned into that. And just as you were talking about your colleague, it's interesting. It sounds like he is very much like an advocate for other people. And I feel like that's kind of what Ed becomes at the end of the story with Ira. He becomes an apprentice, but he's also doing something that will ultimately bless and give purpose to Ira. And the same is true for Shelley. She's being an advocate for Holling. She's doing something that will give purpose and help him. And in a way, is Chris the name of the DJ? Is that right? Yeah, Chris is being an advocate. Dr. Fleisch is there's a lot of people who care and come alongside in this episode. And it's like a good reminder for us when we see people in crisis to try to be advocates as much as we can.
Right. And for our listeners, as you say, Ed became an advocate and he gave up the film to Ira and dropped that whole piece of it because this became the learning and the apprenticeship became paramount in his being at that moment. What an amazing bit of writing in this episode, Barney. What a phenomenal choice to and be amazed.
Yeah, this is one of my personal favorites. Especially, I don't know how many times I've seen the last scene, and I also tear up at the very end as well. But I love how Shelley used, at the very beginning of the episode, Shelley found these puppets and just said, what are these? Are these puppets? And he's like, yeah, of course they're mine. This is my box. And then in the middle of the episode, when Holly makes a quick trip back into town and he's still, drunk from the good stuff, that he's making the still, he doesn't have any, he's having trouble respecting Shelley. He's like, well, what do you know? You're only, what are you, 19? And he kind of lists her so-called achievements, and he doesn't put much value in them. And I think that especially is what floors him and made me think of this question at the end, where we see this person who, she hasn't lived as long as he has. She hasn't done, nearly any as much as he has done, even on a normal day. And then she's still able to really key in on what's essential for, for what Holly needs. And she sees that it's, perspective, but also love, reminding him that he's so loved by Maurice. She mentions this wonderful friendship that they have and his place in the community. He opens the bar, and of course from her, and that she was drawn to him. It wasn't anything that he did. It's just who he is that she loved and loves.
Thank you so much, Barney, and thank you, Ken, for being a part of today's episode. And Ken, I know you need to get going, and so I just wonder, Barney, if you would be willing to close us, if that's okay.
Yeah, we are so thankful for everyone joining us here today, and such a rich episode. We hope that maybe you'll find a way or be inspired to see it for yourselves and see the connections and different stages in lives that the characters go through, and maybe how we can think of things as a dialectic, as maybe Chris would say, as they start lower and they learn and they change and they grow from that. And I think that we can see in our lives and the walks that we've been in, the ways that we are maybe kind of hopefully continuing on such a progressive spiral as well, upward. And we always value having you all as our listeners and watching along with us. And we hope that you, as well as much as we do, are looking forward to the next episode as well. And we'll see you all again then on the Two World Podcast, today with Ken